Hi, welcome to Wide Open Road Art's Roving Conversation series. This conversation is with Clare McCracken. Clare exhibited at Wide Open Road Art in 2016. Since then, she has gone on to undertake numerous public art projects and is currently undertaking a PhD at RMIT. Her practice is currently concerned with methodologies of participatory art in the age of hypermobility. Basically, we just want to start off by asking people about their art practice, so just like the history of it. So where did it all begin for you?
I guess I finished cultural theory, a creative arts degree, and I was really anxious about making. I felt like I would be an art critic because that felt a lot safer and a lot easier.
Oh, right.
And I wasn't sure what my niche would be, because I didn't have a discipline. I wasn't a painter, I wasn't a photography.
Was that creative arts at Melbourne?
Yeah.
So very theory.
Very theory.
But there is you can do...
I did lots of practical subjects, so I learnt how to cast in bronze and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't see myself as a practitioner. But I was really interested in the intersection between the city and the art.
Right, yes.
And so I did my honours thesis on the Situationist International and looking at the way that Melbourne City Council was using arts policy to kind of revitalise inner city Melbourne through the laneway commissions. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and I loved writing that, and I really wrote it it was kind of a creative writing PhD about kind of moving through the city and inhabiting the city.
Did you do your PhD? Was that honours?
That was honours. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So what helped you take the leap from critic to practitioner?
So then I took some time off, and then I came back and did a master's at RMIT in art and public space.
Oh, cool.
And I think the universities are so different. I always tell people to go to as many different universities as they can, because they all have their own specialty and vibe.
Yeah.
And RMIT is fantastic at matching you with industry.
Great.
So I started that course, and the teacher forced me into making something. He was like, no, don't critique other people's work. Don't be a curator.
So with the Masters in Public Art, you can do that as a critique or as a theory based.
You can do it so it's completely interdisciplinary. So you can be in local government, you could be an architect, you could be a landscape architect. So it has this really beautiful broad spectrum of disciplines, which is something I've always been really interested in. I'm not necessarily interested in just sitting in the arts.
Yeah.
So I got kind of forced into making as part of that.
Yeah.
And that gave me a lot of confidence because it went really well.
So what were some of your early projects?
So in those days, they used to do these really large site projects. So you'd spend a week somewhere and you'd have to build a site-specific artwork for that place.
So you said that you learnt some sort of skills in creative arts, because that sounds quite challenging to just come and be like, right, build a public artwork. That's quite a skill.
So I guess I also naturally had skills because I grew up on 100 acres of bush, building cubbies, and my parents built a house around me. So I'm quite confident with practical. I just wasn't really confident about, in hindsight, maybe I wasn't confident about the art world and that I had a place within it.
Yeah.
And so from that course, I then got shortlisted for public art commissions pretty quickly and got a major commission, which I was completely out of my depth then, because it was like a $50,000 permanent public artwork. And
that's incredible. Is that somewhere in town?
It's still there.
Where is it?
It's in Noble Park.
Okay.
So it was part of the Eastlink development. Dandenong City Council worked with communities that were being affected by that freeway and did a lot of work around community development projects and amenities and also artworks in those areas.
There's some really interesting projects all along all the freeways.
So there was the freeway itself used Anna Schwartz and had very large scale commissioning. So I wasn't part of that. I was commissioned by local government, but there is a lot of artwork along. Melbourne does pretty freeways.
They do. So did a lot of the commissions along the freeway come through Hannah Schwartz?
So for that one freeway,
So Carl Morton Hotel and all that.
Yeah. So they were all artists on her books, as I understand it.
Wow. Okay. So from there, from that early commission to where you are now, what was?
So then it was just a kind of roller coaster of getting lots of different commissions, one after the other.
Yeah.
And then I also kind of tapped back into the theatre making community, who I'd known really well
at uni.
Doing creative arts, and I started working with a really gorgeous team of people on immersive, really large-scale immersive works.
Right, okay.
Which is still some of the stuff I'm probably the most proud of.
Yeah.
And again, that was, working across disciplines. I was the visual artist, there was a sound artist, theatre makers, but just that nature of banging out really clever ideas with groups of people and how dynamic they can come. Yeah. I mean,
that's actually, and I might talk to you more when that's not filming this, but that's exactly where I'm at the moment in terms of my interests.
Yeah.
So conceptually, what drove that for you? What was your...
So those works that we made are all around Australian issues. So I think I now describe myself as somebody like inherently interested in telling the narratives of place.
Yes.
And I've been doing a PhD for 2.5 years, and through that process I've worked out that yes, I'm an artist and I'm making art. I'm actually probably more a geographer.
Oh, wow.
And I'm really interested in place and interested in place over time as well. Yeah.
And the stories within that place, like the people within the place, is that important, or is it more like the geology or whatever?
To a certain degree, and like a lot of the work is immersive, so people come to it. But while I did have a stage of doing a lot of participatory work, I don't do that so much. I'm actually less interested in involving people in the making than I am in having them have an extraordinary experience further down the path. Yeah.
So is the experience of the view. So are they still public artworks that you're making?
So they're usually in site-specific locations, which I guess makes them more public artworks than in a gallery. So the next exhibition I'll be doing is from a residency on a container ship, and that will be exhibited at the Mission to Seafarers as an immersive experience when you see the work that I produced as part of that residency.
Great.
Yeah.
So when you're making the work, are you essentially thinking about creating an experience for the viewer? Is that what's...
No, I've started to liken it a bit like an archaeologist. So maybe I'll have an idea. So say another work I've done recently is around kind of working out where big things came from. So those tourist traps in rural Australia.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So I went on a 7,500 kilometre road trip and looked at them all and wrote a diary. So from the experience of sight, I then work out what I'm going to do, and in that case it's turning into a podcast, so it'll be something you can listen to while driving. So it could be it could go anywhere really, because it's based off the experience of geography and cultural geography, so the people, the place, the histories.
That sounds amazing. And materially, is there any particular material?
No, so materials would be absolutely guided by... And I do make a lot of stuff, but I'm never afraid to collaborate either. And this probably makes me different too. So for the Mission to Seafarers exhibition, I had 2 different photographers help me document work I was making. So the exhibition won't be just mine. So my feeling about fabrication is that it's a collaboration. So it doesn't just be branded as my work. I'd say Clare McCracken with... those photographers, which is probably more like a theatre maker, and less like a visual artist.
You said that you've worked with sound people a bit, so where does that come into?
So on those large-scale immersive works, I worked with 2 different sound designers, and I think that you can't build an immersive world without sound. It's the absolutely magic component. And finding a really good composer makes an enormous difference. So there's 2 people I've worked with, but I would be more than happy. Like, I think that different composers can be appropriate for different works. I think it's kind of the most affecting part. You can put all your energy into a visual design, but if you can still hear the cars on the freeway, it's not particularly transformative.
So true.
Yeah, I've got it's been like I don't know, I'm sort of figuring that out, and light as well, those two things. And
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, light is also very powerful, and I'm completely useless at it.
Do you work with a light technician?
Yeah, those big ones, actually, usually the lighting technician is the person we haven't been able to afford, because I also believe quite passionately in paying people when you're collaborating with them, and so it makes those big projects really expensive and means that I only do one every couple of years. I find it, I mean, having said that, I've actually just asked someone to do a favour, but I try not to do that. I do that as little as possible.
So picking up on that, because that's actually taps into another area that we're really exploring with these interviews, which is the sustainability of life as an artist. Like, how do you get by, I guess?
So I think the early years where I was doing hundreds of small-scale commissions with local government was achievable, and like I could live, I could afford my rent, but I was working 7 days a week. Yeah, that's and I think the process of starting the PhD and getting a scholarship and going down to 5 days has made me, it's really made me realise how much pressure I was under. Yeah. And the quality of my work has improved because I've got so much more dream space. Yes. And I'm not trying to pump work out quickly. Yeah. The works I'm making at the moment are taking 12 months. Yeah. And you can tell they're so much better when they... I mean, some people are very good at working under pressure, but I think that my work just becomes a lot more dynamic over time. Yeah.
Do you think that it's any easier or harder, or do you think it's changed the situation for artists in Australia over like the last decade or so?
Definitely. I mean, I think the funding issues at the moment are incredibly critical, and a lot of my, as I got older, people dropped away as well. Like I remember by 30, I'd be part of a group of artists, and often there's older men, but women have to leave to have children. Yeah. And I would, I don't have them. So, so I was the one still sitting at the table, but I was really aware that the numbers were dropping away, and often not because of the skill set either. No. Yeah. Like, I think I even see this with people I've taught. Some of the most skilled people will leave the industry simply because they can't be supported.
Yeah. So are you suggesting is that like a financial thing, or is that like a, biological women having children?
It's often a financial thing. I mean, it's just too insecure to have.
And if you've got a family, you need to do something.
Yeah, particularly in the early years. I think women often come back once the kids have gone to school. But
that's definitely...
Childcare is so expensive. So...
And something else that I've observed is that actually making art is quite often seen as a bit decadent and a bit indulgent, and spending money on chaos so that you can make art is sometimes seen as a bit like slightly spending your day at the day spa or something.
Yeah, because I actually still put quite a lot of money into my own practice.
Well, you sort of have to.
I think you have to. Yeah. I mean, I have people in my world who don't do it, who are like, no, I just won't make work. It's a real balance. But yes, I still financially put a lot into my practice every year. Yeah. And it's a weird industry like that. I mean, I don't think there would be many accountants investing as much money as we are. Sunday. Yeah. No. So I think that culturally there is a genuine lack of understanding about what artists do unless they're in your family. Yeah. And how hard they work. I think that is an enormous problem. Like, I mean, people still, when I introduce myself, will say, "Oh, so you're like a doll bludger?" Like, actually, no, I work 7 days a week. Yeah. And actually, I've never been on the dole either. Like, and that's not to say that that's a bad thing, and many people will have to, but so do many other people in other industries. Like, it's, I find that stuff, and I find the way particularly federal politics talks about the arts incredibly. Yeah. Tragically. Yeah.
So you've managed to stay in the city though, you're still living
so I did do one project where I lived out in the outer suburbs of Melbourne and commuted every day for a month, and
as a project
cool. And then I built an immersive installation about the future of the suburbs, and that was a good lesson about me not commuting.
Yeah.
I found it really hard.
Yeah.
Because of the time it took where I'd probably be making, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think that a lot of creative people are being forced to live in the outer suburbs, or?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I could buy a house in that suburb.
Yeah.
So it just means that I live in an apartment, which makes making things really hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have a studio?
So I've got one at university at the moment,
yeah.
and then I have, my tools go on site with me, and I use my drop saws on site.
Yeah.
And my mum lives 350 kilometres away, but on a beautiful bush block. So if I need to make big things, I can go there. Yeah.
In the because I know that you've travelled a bit with your work. Have you do you see other cultures doing it differently, the support of the arts?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot about Germany I don't enjoy, but if you tell a German that you're an artist, like the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, you must work very hard." And there's a huge, because corporations in Germany buy art. There's just this kind of art market that is completely inconceivable to the average Australian.
Do they buy art and have collections? Or
and they often employ art historians and
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
It means that art is often different though. Like I think a lot of Australians use ephemeral materials or performance.
Yes.
Whereas if you have an art market, you're probably more likely to producing things for frames.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, when like in the foyers here, it's always just like abstract paintings.
Yeah.
There's an industry
Who's
there.
even making them?
Yeah, somebody is doing really well at these abstract paintings, So that's sort of like a political thing, and what I was wondering was, do you think that art is political, or that's something that art...
I don't think all those abstracts are political.
No, sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant this conversation about the government supporting it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had this discussion recently because that suburban work, I worked with a lot of planners.
Yeah.
And one of them kind of levelled this idea to me that we're our own worst enemy because everyone in the arts is crazily left-wing. And so we subscribe to one side of politics, but I'm actually not sure that's accurate. Like, I think that we are I think like any group of people, we're pretty broad. Often we're university educated.
Yeah.
That might be something that separates us as a cohort, high levels of education. But so again, I think that's probably a perception, like potentially conservative governments don't think that we vote for them, but I suspect there are many artists that do. That's and arts collectors.
Yeah, there's certainly collectives.
Yeah.
And do you think that art in itself, do you think that it should engage with social issues, current issues? Do you think that's part of the role of art?
I think it can, but I don't think that all art needs to. And I think there's a role for all different forms of provocation, and it doesn't, not socially engaged art isn't the only great art out there. There's a lot of fantastic socially engaged art, but I think there's a role for many different conversations.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to be really careful of funding, is making sure that things that aren't trying to fix something get funded.
That's a good point.
As well as the things that are trying to fix things.
Yeah.
And then there's like a slight cynical feeling for me about art that is fixing things, which is that's a pretty cheap deal. I mean, this is not my idea alone. Claire Bishop writes about this as well, but for the neoliberal state, paying $10 for the artist to go in and talk to the homeless rather than actually $100,000 to build accommodation. So perhaps we are used as a bit of a distraction and a scapegoat in those situations.
Yeah, because they still get points because they supported the arts, but actually it's not helping them.
That's
interesting.
And then there's sometimes I've been involved in those projects and I've questioned, like, I can work as hard as I can on them, but potentially 5 social workers would have made a much better impact.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What's when like in those kinds of projects, when the artist does do something, what's the effect? What can it hope to achieve I think that's really good.
And there are some extraordinary makers out there with amazing empathy that really do make grassroots difference.
Yes.
So I think it's an important part of the puzzle, but it just shouldn't be the only art that's made. Yeah.
What about the community, like artist community? Do you feel like you have a community, and is that something that you think is important?
I think it took me a while to find that community, but I suspect if you did a fine arts degree, you would have it. Yeah. And mine, because of the degree I did, is diverse, but I really like that. So
Diverse is good.
So there'll be creative writers and there'll be theatre makers and then I also work with a lot of architects and things like that. So I'm okay about it, but I'm not embedded in that mainstream art scene. Yeah, perhaps I'm the most I've ever been embedded in it just because I'm doing a fine arts PhD. Yeah.
So what's your PhD on?
So it's totally interdisciplinary. And there's an area in sociology called the mobilities turn or mobilities paradigm, which came about, consolidated itself in the 1990s. And it looks at the impacts of mobility systems on societies. So one of the most profound impacts would be the train.
Right, okay.
And through constructions of trains, our cities completely reshaped themselves. We had to invent Greenwich Mean Time so we had timetables because every little town set their own time and you wouldn't know when the train was coming. So you used to have these beautifully complex timetables that would be like, the train will be arriving at, Greenwich time, 3 p.m. Lancaster time, 3:10.
Amazing.
And then concept relationships also started to disperse for the first time. So obviously the train had an impact on cities like Melbourne as well, but perhaps I think what is far more profound in the Australian context is the impact of the car and the impact of the ship. And so I'm doing 3 projects, and one of them looks at the way the car has shaped Melbourne. So the fact that we've built such an extraordinarily sprawling city, which is becoming problematic now that we're 5 million people. And then I looked at, I did the project looking at big things, which was really looking at the impact of the post-Second World War road networks on rural Australia.
So was that where they all popped up, the big thing?
Yeah. So
was it like a tourist?
They're they're tourist traps, but they originate from the US. And the first one's actually built by an American coming to Australia, the Big Banana. But to me, this is my argument. I mean, you could never prove this, but my argument is they're part of this, with the mechanisation of farming and the growth of cities and people moving away from the country. Rural towns really felt like they were slipping off the map post the Second World War. So they are part of forcing that speeding car that will just bypass you and ignore you to stop in awe. And have economic outcomes like the gift shop in the basement. And each of the projects is framed by a personal narrative. So the town I grew up in the 1980s was going to build the world's biggest snowman.
Oh wow.
And it was going to block the view of Mount Buffalo. And so my father my father took the township to the Victorian planning VCAT and won, and it was never built.
Oh, great.
But my first nickname when I started school, because it coincides with it, was Snowman Killer. And the town was just, the local newspaper and powerful members in council were just furious with my father.
Oh, wow.
And so...
Because they thought it was going to bring money.
They just thought this was going to save the town, this snowman. And my parents were seen as intellectual outsiders because they'd only lived there for 20 years. What would they know? And so there's these amazing press clippings that we still have where Dad's being slammed in the newspaper.
God.
So
That's a great story.
So it's a story that we've always loved. I think the town's entirely forgotten about it. The only people that remember it is us, just because it was amazing.
Oh yeah.
And the newspaper clippings look fake, like they look like an art project. And so I built a carrot that was the scale of that snowman's nose, and then I did my road trip around Australia with this big carrot. And that was kind of a way of linking that historical moment to the contemporary, which was really the moment of friction and change for rural Australia. And big things are still being constructed, but not like they were in the 80s and 90s. They're kind of falling into ruins now.
Are they?
Yeah.
That's interesting in itself.
Yeah.
Do you think people still visit them?
Yeah, I think there's like extraordinary love, particularly for our generation. I think my parents' generation is divided. Some of them saw them as a great economy and others just saw them as kitsch and horrific in the worst part of Australia. But
I think by our generation they'd already become hilarious.
Yeah, and I also think that for us it's the family road trip. It's when your parents are still alive or they're still married. It's like a really, it's a nostalgic kind of like love of what you did when you were a child. So they're kind of emotionally embedded in us.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So what will you make? Do you know? Like,
so that one is I've ended up writing a kind of rollicking tale about the larger impact of the car. So it starts in my country town with the heated exchanges over the giant snowman, but it also talks about the kind of the legacy of car crashes when you're growing up in rural Australia in the 80s. Like I can still because it's, I mean, seatbelts have come in, but it's really before, it's before TACs, the early 1990s, I think, from memory. Right. So it's really before we start to get the enormous road toll under control. And also it talks a little bit about the chemical legacy of rural Australia too, because that particular town was really affected by DDT, which was also kind of the legacy of the 20th century. On those bases. And kind of in the end it made sense that it would be something that you would listen to while driving. Because it also talks a lot about, because I actually love driving, so it talks a lot about that really beautiful feeling of moving through landscapes.
It's a great feeling, isn't it? It's such a feeling of freedom.
Yeah, feeling of freedom, but also I was just listening to a book tape of Bill Bryson's book about Australia, and he talks about how the roads are so narrow here. You know, like you're often not on huge freeways or highways. And so there's this like embodied feeling. He doesn't use embodied, but that's how I kind of felt, like the landscape wraps around you. You're not separated from it.
Oh, that's good. So you must be just about, are you finishing your PhD fairly soon?
Got 12 months.
12 months to go. So where do you want to take your practice next?
That's like the $1 million question, I think. I think through this process, I've learnt an enormous amount about my practice. I think that I've realised that I like art almost as a method of understanding the world, more than necessarily an outcome.
Right.
And so the outcomes are becoming something else. They're becoming articles or, chapters for books. And I've really loved being able to do this much writing and this much reading, because they're the things I never had time for.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think you learn so much about the world by writing about it.
Well, what you said earlier about dream time, like not having that dream time, that's true. No one has that, and I wonder what the effect of that is. What's the effect on our world if no one's got time to dream? Which I think is a real thing, because everyone's under the thumb, everyone's working harder, housing's more expensive, it's I just wonder what it's going to mean for like to go to uni now is, kids, it's so hard to
I think I'm very lucky for the age that I am, the early 2000s was an awesome time to go to uni.
Absolutely.
I could still have a really crappy rolling rising damp terrace house beside.
And living in like Victoria Carlton, that's where we all lived, and it was like affordable, and it's going to be interesting.
But I mean, I think that there are people that afford a very different lifestyle. It's just that I'm in the arts and academia, which would be the two most underpaid and also casualized as well. I mean, I'm in two industries where like there is just zero permanency at any time.
So was your move towards academia because you wanted this time to explore stuff, or was it somewhat also inspired by like the what's the word, like reliability, like a job basically?
No, I mean, I actually really love teaching. Like and I think I'm good at it. So
what do you teach?
So I teach in the art and public space department now, where I started. Well, I used to actually, but I'm not anymore. Yeah, at RMIT.
Yeah. And
then I casually teach, like the odd undergraduate subject in public art.
Yeah.
And the odd tutoring in the theory program too, because one of my great passions is kind of the way that fine arts has separated theory from practice, and I really love tutoring theory because I can constantly say, okay, like there's all these great artists and all these great ideas, but how is that going to feed into your practice? Because we kind of teach them as two separate things. And that was the brilliant thing about creative arts, is it taught you how to mix those two things together.
Yeah, I've just been thinking about that recently, and I was looking at, I did my master's a while ago, and I was looking at it, and that was something I struggled with, and rereading it, I was like, I never resolved it. And I feel like maybe people are getting better at it, I hope.
I even in the time I've been in the PhD program, I would say that people's ability to apply theory to their practice is improving all of the time. And in practice-led research is a really new thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think when I did my master's, it was really new.
Yeah,
so that's probably why it was all a bit, because it was like, these are your ideas and this is your practice, and write your thesis, and then if you're also making art over here, they're probably going to be connected.
Yeah.
Which on reflection is like, well, that's not enough.
Yeah. And I think there's still ideological fights out there about exactly what practice-led research is too.
Yes.
So I believe that you should be doing a literature review and kind of embedding your practice in the larger academy and moment in time, and that's why I'm using so much current sociology and things like that. Yeah. But there's another stream of thought that says, no, really, like the only thing that is important is the community around you of artists, and what your work is like that, and that the research is just practice, so it's kind of like this pure practice approach.
Okay. I think that's fine, but I think if you're going to do a PhD, probably part of that is just immersing it in the broader thing, I would think.
That's what I find that really rewarding too.
Yeah,
but
there's so much to be got out of that.
Yeah, and I think that when I go to sociology or geography conferences, the fact that I learnt about big things like any of them would have, but I did it with a giant carrot, like has they're so interested and like fascinated by these different methods and what the different things that they will bring to the table as a consequence, like if you were a sociologist, you would have gone and you would have interviewed the people that made them, and so their work is really important, but my work tells another part of the narrative that's also important.
Oh, that's great. I'll just ask you one last question, which was, if you could do like a dream collaboration with anyone, or I guess anyone, who would that be? If history, if time and everything.
If time. Okay, so if we eliminated time,
eliminate all constraints.
I think I'd like to do a time travel project. And I think I would like to know the lost narratives of the great influences of the relationship between art and city, which is all of those narratives of women's engagement that we've actually just lost because they're not in the history books. And I mean, the women's histories that we do have are generally women that were highly educated and very wealthy, because they could actually write and leave something behind. So I would love to, I think, travel through time and flaneur and derive and all of those other urban techniques, but actually do it in a way that could genuinely talk about how women have shaped cities over time.
That's certainly a thing that's missing. Well, thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure.